Leaving confession for Holy Week sounds reasonable until you realize that many times you're not postponing it because you want to do it better. You're postponing it because you don't want to face yet what you already know you need to deal with. And that changes everything. Because one thing is to say, I want to prepare well. And it's a very different thing to use that phrase to keep kicking down the road an encounter with God you've been avoiding for weeks, months, or even years. A lot of people function like this without noticing. I'll go during Holy Week. There's still time. I want to do it calmly. When the time comes, I'll confess. It sounds organized. It sounds mature. It even sounds devout. But careful, sometimes it isn't order. It's resistance. And here's the uncomfortable part. The soul has an incredible ability to disguise running away as good intention. It convinces you that you're not avoiding anything. It convinces you you're just waiting for the right moment. It repeats that later you'll go with more peace, more clarity, a better examination of conscience, more time. And meanwhile, you don't go. So let's get straight to it. You shouldn't wait until Holy Week to go to confession, because confession isn't a seasonal formality. It isn't a calendar tradition. And it isn't a religious task you should save for when it fits the mood. It's a real act of reconciliation. And when you postpone it, many times you arrive late, you arrive poorly, or you don't arrive at all. That's the truth. Look, there's something many people misunderstand about this sacrament. They treat confession like a kind of annual soul checkup, like it's that one moment of the year when you catch up with God, fulfill the obligation, breathe, and move on. Very similar to someone organizing overdue paperwork or cleaning a room that's been closed for months. But confession wasn't meant for that. Confession exists because sin breaks, cools, dirties, divides, and distances. Not always in an outrageous way, sometimes silently, sometimes inside. Sometimes through things nobody sees, but you still carry. And when that happens, Christian logic isn't, I'll fix it later. Christian logic is reconciliation. The sooner the better. Because when someone needs reconciliation, waiting is rarely a sign of wisdom. Very often it's a sign that something inside is resisting. And here's what matters. A huge number of people don't delay confession because they lack faith. They delay it because of a mix of shame, fear, discomfort, and spiritual exhaustion. They don't want to say certain things out loud. They don't want to reopen wounds. They don't want to face sins they already know too well. They don't want to stand before God with that naked truth. So the magic phrase appears, I'll go later. Later than what? Later when you feel better, later when you get organized, later when you've dropped certain habits, later when you have more peace, later after this week, later when life calms down, later when Holy Week arrives. And the thing is that later almost never fixes the problem. It only stretches it. Because if you really look closely, postponing confession usually doesn't lighten the heart, it loads it more. Sin doesn't become lighter by waiting. Shame doesn't disappear by letting days pass. And inner clarity many times doesn't come before you confess. It comes precisely when you decide to stop running. A lot of people get that wrong. They think they have to be okay first in order to confess. And no, you confess precisely because you're not okay. Because you don't want to stay the same. Because you don't want to keep dragging things that weigh you down, divide you, or shut you off inside. You confess because you need grace, not because you've already solved everything on your own. If you could fix yourself, you wouldn't need to go. And this is where it gets serious. There are people who say, I want to do it well. That's why I'm waiting for Holy Week. But many times the opposite happens. Waiting doesn't make the confession better. It makes it later, more piled up, more anxious, and sometimes less sincere. Because the soul hardens when it postpones too long what it knows it has to do. Think about this. What feels hard to say today may feel even harder tomorrow. What embarrasses you today can become a mountain after weeks of delay. What you could carry today with humility starts mixing later with nerves, guilt, self-justification, and exhaustion. And then another problem appears. You arrive at Holy Week carrying a burden you could have already put down. That has very concrete consequences. You reach Holy Thursday, Good Friday, or Easter with a heart split between what you're celebrating and what you still don't dare to hand over. Instead of entering more freely, you enter dragging yourself. Instead of listening more deeply, inside you're stuck with an unfinished task. Instead of living those days with gratitude, you keep turning over whether you'll have time, whether there will be enough priests, whether you'll find a slot, whether you'll have the courage in the end. And the worst part is that many people normalize that, as if it were inevitable, as if it were almost the logical way to live it, but it isn't. Also, there's a very concrete and very human reason you shouldn't wait. During Holy Week, everything gets compressed. More people, more movement, different schedules, packed parishes, priests rushing from one celebration to another, lines, hurry, fatigue, and what should be a serene, honest, well-prepared encounter can turn into something rushed. Not because the sacrament loses its value, of course not, but because you arrive in a worse state. You arrive with the feeling of now I have to. You arrive at the last minute. You arrive with the pressure of not wanting to be left out. You arrive with an examination of conscience done poorly or halfway. You arrive afraid you'll freeze up. You arrive thinking more about getting it over with than about living a real reconciliation. And here's the most common mistake in this whole topic: believing that waiting longer will prepare you better. Not always. In fact, many times it prepares you worse, because time, when used well, helps. But time, when used to avoid, entangles. And that's true for so many things in spiritual life. Some decisions mature with patience. Others, when delayed too long, start rotting inside. Confession often falls into this second group. If you already know you need to confess, you already have enough reason not to keep postponing it. You don't need to feel perfect. You don't need to have your whole life sorted out. You don't need an ideal atmosphere. You don't need the right week. You need humility and decision, nothing more, well, and grace. But that's exactly what you're going there to seek. Now, another objection shows up that sounds very sensible. I want to do it calmly. And that's good. Of course it's good to want to do it calmly. The problem is using calm as an excuse not to take the step. Because a confession done in peace isn't born only from choosing a pretty date. It's born from stopping the delaying of what's stealing your peace. And that changes everything. There are people who haven't confessed in a long time and say, I'm embarrassed to go back. Or, the priest will think badly of me. Or, I don't even know where to start. Look, tons of people feel that. You're not strange. You're not the only one. And precisely for that reason, you shouldn't wait for the fear to grow bigger. Because fear, when it's fed, doesn't become reasonable. It becomes larger. And here's a freeing truth. You don't have to make a spectacular confession. You don't have to sound brilliant. You don't have to remember every perfect sentence. You don't have to impress anyone. You don't even have to arrive with huge confidence. What makes a confession good isn't that it sounds nice. It's that it's honest. That's enough. Everything else gets ordered inside. In fact, many of the best confessions don't start with someone very confident, but with someone tired of running. With someone who finally sits down, breathes, and tells the truth. No ornaments. No theater. No long speeches. Just truth and real repentance. And honestly, that's worth far more than a confession prepared for weeks but lived out of calculation or avoidance. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine you don't wait for Holy Week. Imagine you confess before, not a month before out of mathematical obligation before, while you still have room. Before, when you can do it without rush. Before, when you're not watching the clock or the line or the bustle of the parish. Before, when you can enter Holy Week already reconciled. That changes a lot, because then you don't arrive at the holy days carrying an inner debt that steals your attention. You arrive freer, more available, cleaner inside, not perfect of course, but more open, more able to pray, more able to look at the cross without constantly thinking, I still have this pending. That's no small thing. That's why when someone says, I'll confess during Holy Week, the real question isn't only when they'll go. The question is what exactly they're waiting for. Are you waiting to feel more ready? waiting to have less shame, waiting to behave better for a few days before you go, waiting for a peace that won't come without taking the step, waiting for a more organized version of yourself. And the problem is that, if you're honest, many times you're not waiting for anything new. You're just giving your fear more time. Let's dismantle a few excuses quickly. I'm not ready yet. Maybe you'll never be fully ready, and you don't need to be. I want to do it later and calmly. Calm doesn't come from the calendar. It comes from deciding. It's been too long since I went. Precisely for that reason, don't delay it more. I'm ashamed. Normal. But shame isn't cured by waiting. It's cured by walking through it. First, I have to change some things. No, first go to grace, then fight better. Holy Week fits better. Reconciliation doesn't work by atmosphere. It works by truth. And here's the real difference. The person who waits usually imagines an ideal confession. The person who decides steps into a real confession. And in spiritual life, the second one almost always wins. So what should you do starting today? Something very simple. Don't look for the perfect moment. Look for a real one. Check the hours. Pick a day. Don't turn it into a massive operation. Make a sincere examination of conscience without dramatizing and without dressing it up. Don't go to tell an elegant story about yourself. Go to tell the truth, with humility, with sorrow, with the desire to return to God. And that's it. You don't need to stage a huge inner scene. You don't need to wait for a special emotion. You don't need to walk in like you're presenting a report. Walk in like someone who wants to be reconciled. Because, in the end, the best confession usually isn't the most postponed. It's the most honest one. The one that stops negotiating. The one that stops hiding behind later. The one that understands postponing isn't always prudence. Many times it's fear dressed up nicely. Don't turn confession into a last-minute task. Don't reach Holy Week dragging what you could have already handed over. Don't wait to feel worthy. Don't wait to be at peace in order to go. Go precisely because you're not completely at peace. And when you do, you'll notice it. Not because everything suddenly becomes easy. Not because all your struggles disappear. But because there's a huge difference between entering Holy Week resisting and entering reconciled. Don't wait anymore. Tell me in the comments, do you usually confess before Holy Week, or do you leave it for the end? And subscribe to keep going deeper into the Catholic faith with no fluff.